Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. Just to remind you, on Saturday we have Mindspeak at the Intercontinental. Joshua Oigara, the CEO of Kenya Commercial Bank, and there's a link for what Mindspeak is all about. It's really tremendous, and we have a huge engagement, and I'm looking forward to hosting Joshua. We hosted him previously in December 2012 with Dr. Martin Oduor Otieno, and that was when he took charge of the bank, and we're now down the road some ways, and it's going to be interesting to catch up and see what's been happening. We've had some great guests in 2014. If you get a chance, do have a look. Christine Lagarde, Dr. Naikuni, Charles Ireland, the EAC Secretary General, Dr. Richard Sesibera, Munir Ahmed of National Bank. Home thoughts, I turn to Lao Tzu. The way to do is to be. Music in the soul can be heard by the universe, and by favorite, men are born soft and supple. Dead they are stiff and hard. Plants are born tender and pliant. Dead they are brittle and dry. Thus whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death. Whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. The hard and stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail. I came across a chap called Gautam Trivedi, and he's posted some great pictures, and this one is called Conquer the Unknown, and it reminded me of the time we went to Lamu and we went and watched these little tortoises hatch, and this photograph reminded me of that, and it is a huge move as they hatch and then dash for the ocean. And then of course the moon landing, which is one of my favorite images because it sort of encapsulates so much, new frontiers, there's so much promise. Going back to Don Delillo, who I've still been reading, and this review by Martin Amis that was in the New Yorker. The New Yorker, by the way, has freed up their entire archive. And he's referring to a story that I read, and reading it again, he really captures it. Such a register sustains the even more enchanting human moments in World War III. A mission specialist and his young sidekick, Volmer, one of Delillo's comically intimidating nerds like Heinrich in White Noise, are up in Tomahawk 2, orbiting the Earth and gathering intelligence, tricked out with their auction clogs, modal keys, sense frequencers, and quantum burns. The specialist is monitoring data on his mission console when a voice breaks in, a voice that carried with it a strange and unspecifiable poignancy. He checks in with his flight dynamics and conceptual paradigm officers at Colorado Command, and we ask ourselves, has there ever been a more distinctive exponent of dialogue than Don Delillo? We have a deviate tomahawk. We copy. There's a voice. We have gross oscillation here. There's some interference. I've gone redundant, but I'm not sure it's helping. We are clearing an outframe to locate source. Thank you, Colorado. It is probably just selective noise. You are negative red on the step function quad. It was a voice, I told them. We have just received an affirm on selective noise. We will correct Tomahawk. In the meantime, advise you to stay redundant. The voice, in contrast to Colorado's metallic pidgin, is a melange of repartee, laughter, and song, with a quality of purest, sweetest sadness. Somehow we are picking up signals from radio programs of 40, 50, 60 years ago. Meanwhile, there is the blue planet, tenderly rendered, with its sediment plumes and kelp beds, lava flows and cold core eddies, storm spiraled, sea bright, breathing heat and haze and color. It really is a tremendous bit of writing there, doesn't it? Do you think you're in some sort of 21st century modern world and suddenly this voice comes from the past, and the way he writes it is so powerful. And then moving on, of course, his predictive powers have been much remarked. To take one graphic instance, it is clear that he never regarded the World Trade Center as a pair of buildings. To him, there were always a pair of bull's eyes in the novel Players. Pammy Wynant works in the WTC for a grief management firm. The towers didn't seem permanent. They remained concepts, no less transient for all their bulk than some routine distortion of light. This is certainly very striking, though we may wonder if the quoted lines shine the brighter as prose because they happen to come true. Delillo said long ago that the mood of the future would be determined not by writers but by terrorists, and those who mocked him for his forecasts must have felt even worse than the rest of us did on September 12, 2001. And then jumping from there, I've been reading Thomas Pynchon Against the Day, and it's so dense, it's like going through a forest. I can only read 10 or 20 pages a day, and it's just like 1,500. But in the New Yorker, again, they picked up on this transnoctial discussion group, which never appears again in the book, but which certainly caught my attention, as it did this reviewer. Time moves on but one axis, advised Dr. Bloke, past to future, the only turnings possible being turns of 180 degrees. In the quaternions, a 90-degree direction would correspond to an additional axis whose unit is -1. A turn through any other angle would require for its unit a complex number. Yet mappings in which a linear axis becomes curvilinear, functions of a complex variable such as w equals ez, where a straight line in the z-plane maps to a circle in the w-plane, said Dr. Rao, do suggest the possibility of linear time becoming circular, and so achieving eternal return as simply, or should I say complexly, as that, as if the hour itself, in growing later, had exposed some obscure fatality. The discussion moved to the subject of the luminiferous ether, as to which exchanges of opinion, relying like quaternions largely on faith, often fail to avoid a certain vehemence. And I've always thought that time was surely not linear. I just couldn't plug into it. Then, returning back, that fellow I told you, Gautam Trivedi, he's tweeted, "The world we live in," and it's a photograph, I think, from Gaza, and it's pretty arresting. Matt Fry tweeted this photograph of Platform 1, Torres Station, the grimmest train, 5 carriages of 250 bodies from MH17, unbearable stench, he said. On the matter of MH17's flight path, Malaysian Airlines confirms that the pilot was instructed to fly at a lower altitude by the Kiev Air Traffic Control Tower upon its entry into Ukraine airspace. MH17 filed a flight plan requesting to fly at 35,000 feet throughout Ukrainian airspace. This is close to the optimum altitude. However, an aircraft's altitude in flight is determined by air traffic control on the ground. Upon entering Ukrainian airspace, MH17 was instructed by Ukrainian air traffic control to fly at 33,000 feet. Then, it is also worth noting that a Ukrainian Su-25 fighter jet equipped with air-to-air R-60 missiles was detected within 5 to 10 kilometers of the Malaysian aircraft, within an air corridor reserved for commercial aircraft. Bloomberg, this sentence caught my attention, "You can't expect reliable information about it from officials or media, whether Russian, Ukrainian or Western." J.M. Sardo tweeted that Russia has shown air control pictures allegedly showing Ukrainian fighter jet picking speed towards MH17. The Malaysian investigators received a black box, which was handed over by Donetsk People's Republic official. I'll put up a photograph of that. And my conclusions are it remains extraordinarily murky. Interesting piece by Paul Mason, Why Israel is Losing the Social Media War Over Gaza. When Shujaa was attacked by the Israeli Defense Force, killing dozens of civilians, the first I heard about it was via Twitter early Sunday morning. An activist on the ground I followed tweeted people running out of Shujaa, bodies lying on ground. Soon after, Mohammed Omer, an award-winning Palestinian journalist who tweets as Mogassa, reported, Israel refuse allowing ambulance crew to get into Shujaa now. Scores of dead bodies in all streets now. Not long after that, numerous Western TV journalists stationed alongside Palestinian ambulance crews, including my colleague Jonathan Miller, reported the same things. There was immediacy, corroboration, and with pictures, evidence. Now compare that to the IDF Twitter feed as news emerged of the massive bombardment and civilian deaths. These are the first tweets. Shujaa is a civilian area where Hamas places its rockets, tunnels, and command centers. Second tweet. Days ago, we warned civilians in Shujaa to evacuate. Hamas ordered them to stay. Hamas puts them in the line of fire. Nothing in those tweets constitutes either a defense of or explanation for the killing of tens of non-combatants. But in the space between them, anybody following the Gaza conflict from both sides would have seen tens of independently shot images and accounts of civilian death and destruction of housing and civilian infrastructure. The incident shows who is winning the social media war over Gaza. It is evidence of a massive change in the balance of power between social media and the old hierarchical media channels we used to rely on to understand wars. Specifically, social media has the power to do three things. First, to show people reality, or a version of it, independent of what TV networks show. Second, and I think this is just as important, journalists on the ground are using social media to report, necessarily short-circuiting the normal editorial processes that used to filter what they said. Third, to get into your real-life consciousness much more powerfully than the old media. Let's be clear, targeting civilians and failing to avoid civilian casualties during military attacks are both indictable as crimes under the Fourth Geneva Convention. Indiscriminate firing of rockets into Israel has been described as a war crime by Amnesty International. And then saying, power, the social media has put power in the hands of the people and taken away from governments. And I concluded by saying, Paul, whom I've been following for a while, by the way, your contemporary real-time perspective on this new hyper-connected century is a pleasure to read, which it is. The Israeli Operation Protective Edge characterization has been sunk by the various hashtags such as Gaza under attack, and that of itself is a remarkable signifier in the 21st century noise. That signifier being that governments essentially no longer own the framing of the argument. The framing is happening in real time and it's compelling and overwhelming. It is remarkable that this operation is now into its 15th day and speaks of Israel's extraordinary power. They are indeed fascinating times. I learned from AfricanArguments.org South Sudan has budgeted for $36.5 million in the budget for social and humanitarian affairs, less than the government paid for a delivery of arms from China that was shipped through Mombasa in June. Currency markets, Euro 135.25, dollar index 80.56. It's sort of crept higher lately. Japanese yen 101.48, Swissy 0.8982, pound 170.80. Aussie 0.9389, India rupee 60.19, South Korean won 10.2381, the Rial 222.11, Egyptian pound 715.06, South African rand 1062.17, a little bit firmer, dollar up 0.4% in the past month, yen 1.1% better, euro down 0.2%, so very, very becalmed foreign exchange markets. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart, 135.25 last. touched 134.91 on July 18th, but it's sort of, I think it's going to soften up a little bit more, but I'll come to why. Dollar index 80.56. I'll put up a 3-month chart. A lot depends on the speed with which the Fed hikes rates, and Yellen, from being extremely dovish, sort of indicated that if unemployment drops dramatically, then she's going to be tightening more quickly. And then somebody else saying the US dollar seems to be showing more sensitivity to what's happening at the front end of the US yield curve, and I used to be a front end trader, so that caught my attention. And then I put up a chart of the euro yen, where I think it's Daiwa Securities are predicting new 2008 highs for the euro against the yen. Gold just above 1300 at 1308.96, and it's retreated from 1345.17 on July the 10th, which was the highest since March 19th, and last week was the first weekly decline in 7. Crude oil 103.29, wasn't that a great buy below 100? It's come back quite strongly. Coming to Africa, Francois Hollande apparently was given a discreet welcome. A Reaper drone flew above his motorcade when he was in Niger. He said, when the Sahel is threatened, Europe and France are threatened. There are plenty of threats in all directions, he said. There's no hierarchy of threats, but there's a particular concern about what's happening in southern Libya, given everything we know about the instability and weakness of the state there, he said in Chad. Put up a photograph of him beginning his Africa tour. Interesting piece in Biz Community, Africa Rising, 10 myths busted. They're saying, that Africa's one market is a myth, is stagnant, is cheap, is traditional, is unsophisticated, is not connected, has no pop culture, has no need for innovation, needs help, is resilient in new media. These are all myths. 56 countries, more than 2,000 dialects. 80% of Africa's private consumption comes from 10 countries: Algeria, Angola, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, Sudan, and Tunisia. World's youngest population, with 50% under the age of 20. More urbanized than India, and by 2016 will have as many urban centers as Europe. Google makes over $90.9 million from online ads alone. South African all shares up 11.163%, ticked 0.53% lower yesterday. Dollar rand, that's got firmer, the rand here, 10.62 last. Egyptian pound back at that level of 7.15. Egyptian stock market eased 1.22% yesterday, losing streak across Africa actually. Egypt up 24.904% this year. Nigerian all share up 3.52%. In 2014, fell 0.25% yesterday, but this is 2008 highs. According to Human Rights Watch, Boko Haram in Nigeria killed at least 2,053 civilians in an estimated 95 attacks during the first half of 2014. Figures are based on detailed analyses and media reports, as well as field investigations. Dramatic increase during 2014 in the numbers of casualties from bomb blasts, including several apparent suicide bombings. Boko Haram is effectively waging war on the people of northeastern Nigeria at a staggering human cost. The West Africa director, atrocities committed as part of a widespread attack on civilians are crimes against humanity, for which those responsible need to be held to account. Bulk of the attacks and casualties, credibly reported and investigated by Human Rights Watch, took place in Borno State, the birthplace of Boko Haram, where 1,446 people died. Attacks killed 151 in Adamawa State and 143 civilians in Yobe State. And then there's a report on Reuters saying that the latest attack has caused 15,000 to flee from the Nigerian town of Damboa after a spate of lethal assaults by Islamist Boko Haram fighters during the weekend. and it's really, I think they've essentially lost control of it up there. Ghana Stock Exchange down 0.44%. It's up 8.251% in 2014. The US Embassy in Ghana is apologizing after a staff member sent what's being described as an errant tweet criticizing the president from the official embassy Twitter account. Ghanaian President John Mahama had tweeted about the country's financial woes, saying that as a people we have had to make sacrifices and that the results of those cutbacks would start to show soon. A post from the US Embassy's Twitter account later retorted to the president, "And what sacrifices are you making?" In an apology made public Monday, the US Embassy in Accra says it has apologized to Ghana's president and is also apologizing to the Ghanaian people. It says that an embassy staff member mixed up a personal Twitter account with that of the embassy's. Interesting article, New York Times, Africans open fuller wallets to the future. I think consumer demand is fueling the continent's economies in new ways, driving hopes that Africa will emerge as a success story in the coming years, comparable to the rise of the East Asian tigers in the second half of the 20th century. That's inevitable, predictable, and predicted. Development is real, and on the back of that, there's a lot of commercial opportunity that's emerging, said Simon Fremantle. At times messy, difficult to quantify, Africa's economies give pessimists and optimists plenty of statistical ammunition, don't we know that? Talking about the mall culture, the tapping of international capital markets is another signal of confidence. Exports from sub-Saharan Africa leapt from $68 billion to more than $400 billion. 1995 to 2012, 300 billion of that came from natural resources. More rapid growth coming from other sectors, black consumers, soap, salt, milk, spaza shops. In the old days you had cathedrals in the middle of towns. Now you have shopping centres. That's a good comment, isn't it? Marriott talking about Honda, talking about the risks in Nigeria. Very interesting article. It's linked up on Rich Wrap-Up, so you get to have a look at it in full. Coming to Kenya, information and communications technology, ICT spending in Kenya has grown from 8.9% of GDP in 2006 to 12.1% in 2013. Danone Group have tweeted this partnership, they've purchased 40% of Brookside, will significantly enhance the platform Danone is currently building in Africa. With 2013 revenues of around 130 million euros, Brookside is East Africa's leading dairy products group. Kenya shilling was at 87.752. The Nairobi All Shares up 10.552% in 2014, but eased 0.32% yesterday. NSE 20 eased 0.28% yesterday, and it's down 0.609% this year. I wrote an article about Arm Cement over the weekend, bulking up to feed its bottom line, and started by reminding that Pradeep had done a mind speak when we were in Westgate, and he describes how he comes back from Stern, and his father hands him the keys to the business and says words to the effect, "It's all yours, son." And he said that's how it started out, and it's a 40-year business, ahead of the curve, bulking up at the right time, I think. And I went to the AGM actually on Friday, where they also released strong first half results. The link for the AGM is up there as well, as is the link to the share price. Finally, moving to yesterday's action at the stock exchange, 733.059 million, most of it in Safaricom, bottom of the trading range now, traded some 1190s yesterday. We've corrected 8.749% off an all-time high. Don't want to see the correction go more than 10%. Highly unlikely that will happen. Overdue a bounce, might not happen immediately, keeping an eye on it. KCB closed unchanged at a record. This is 54. Joshua's at Mindspeak, as I've said, this Saturday. Equity Bank eased 0.543%, but remember, it's rallied 48.78% in 2014. Centum closed at a record. That's up 30% this year. Britam traded slightly off a record. Mumia Sugar fell to an all-time low. It looks egregiously oversold. Market capitalization of just $43 million. Once again, thank you for stopping by.